Hi, folks. If we could start gathering in, and if you could get close to the front and the center, that would be great. We'd like to get started as soon as we can. We have a lot of ground to cover. Yeah, that's right. That's scriptural, from Genesis, maybe, lay of the land. There are reports, hard copy reports in the back. There are some large print reports and also regular size reports. Great. I didn't plan out what to say at this part, so I'll just wing it. Don't hold it close. Hold it close. Got it. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm glad to see this good crowd here today. I hope you've had a chance to read through the report. We did send it out electronically. Hard copies were available last week, and you have a hard copy available today if you need that. The board spent about 2 hours on a Zoom call with Greg a couple weeks ago where he went over the report and answered questions, asked questions. We spent about 2 hours together, so there was a lot to talk about, and we're not done. That was just Greg kind of presenting his report to us. So we want to give him the opportunity to present that to you and for you to ask your questions. As I mentioned earlier, we know that there probably will not be enough time to get everyone's questions answered during this session, but we will, after lunch, gather in the chapel for a Q&A, informal Q&A time. So jot down your questions as you listen today or as you've read through the report. Jot those questions down, and we'll get to them either during this session or during the Q&A. So I think I'll just turn this back over to Greg.
Thank you.
You don't need this.
No, I don't need that. They got me all rigged up here. Good to see everybody. Thank you for sticking around today. I really do want this to be a time of dialogue. So yes, I will review the report. I've been taking sort of an informal poll, and thank you. I know a lot of you have read it already, so I'm going to go through and maybe hit some of the what I would see as highlights, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions. It was interesting. Lila said we talked for 2 hours. I didn't even realize it went 2 hours. But they were just sort of getting warmed up too, which was fun for me. That's what I said. Like I said in the sermon, this should be an EDIE. This should be a what's next kind of place that we're at right now. I will consider it that I've done my work if I'm leaving you wondering and maybe disagreeing a little bit on some things. So as I'm presenting here, I want you to think about a couple of questions. I want you to think about what surprised you in this report, if anything, right? What did not surprise you in this report? And and one more question to ponder is, what in the report is hard to hear? Right? It might be because it just, that hits a little close to home, or it might be because, Greg's 50% right on that, but there's 50% more that he doesn't know, or whatever the reason. And what's one thing that you get really excited about? Okay, so surprised you, didn't surprise you, the hard to hear, and are excited about. Okay, we'll see if we have time for that. We get this extra time after lunch too, where we can talk about things, but that's kind of really where I want you to start thinking next. All right, so here we go. The formatting got a little fouled up just as we did a couple of transfers between different programs, so it doesn't look perfect, but I think it looks pretty darn good. Okay, so just to remind you of the process that we've done, Lila and the executive board reached out to me. Then I started gathering a lot of information. I got a really thick file from you all. It's got reports from your previous interim. It's got and all the public stuff. It's got I read the reports from your board meetings and your council meetings, and it's got attendance stuff, and it's just a lot of good information there that you all keep on hand. So I reviewed that, but then we had the confidential interviews, we got to about 90 of you, which I think is a really good showing. percentage-wise for the congregation. I think it's really good. We had a pretty good, Lila, how'd you feel about the representation of those interviews?
Well, I felt really good about the people that kind of stepped right up into signing up for the interviews. And then when Greg left here and kind of we knew who was interested in signing up for the Zoom calls, I looked, now I kind of put the chart together. I did put the chart together. It's on the front. So it shows you the age ranges. Now I took some liberties and I decided what age group you should live in. So if you don't, well, you don't know which one you're in. But anyway, I wanted to make sure we had representation from young adults. And so I sent out about 20 personal invitations to families that would include young adults, and encourage those folks to also set up some Zoom meetings. So I feel like, some did as a result of that. So I felt pretty good, but I think that this chart actually mirrors kind of who we have been seeing in worship and who in participation. So I felt like we had good representation across the board.
Good, thank you.
Including the, 12, the youth group?
Yeah, we had a great session on Sunday night. The last time I was here, they gave me the honor of giving me a little bit of their time. We played a little volleyball together and then talked for a little bit. It was good. Okay, so these confidential interviews, really important part of the process. And then I take all that information, I try to gather as much information as I can. Try to get as much information as I can and put all that together here in this lay of the land for you. So it's important for me. I've worked as a pastor and as somebody who's been on the other end of sort of the consultancy model, and I've had consultants who have just kind of come and they've collected all the information and they just report the information, and then I say, you guessed it, idai, right? So I always feel like it's important to actually give some tangible recommendations. You could take them or leave them, and you won't hurt my feelings if you leave them. But this is what I would recommend. So I feel like that's a really important part of what this process is about, to have some recommendations there at the end. So this is a little bit about background. I won't really go over this because you know where you've been. I would note that there's been a lot in your history, recent church history, as well as Christianity in the U.S., generally speaking. So we'll keep going. Here's the interviews, a little more background on that. If you recall, the three main questions I asked were, what do you love about the congregation? What are the values of the congregation? That's a question that really is, things are going to change. Things are going to look different. They always have. You look back 50 years, things look different then. They're going to look different in another 50 years. But when we talk about values are things that endure, right? Values are things that cut through no matter what something looks like, okay? So wanted to get a feel for what you felt the values of the congregation were. And then this question of, if you're granted one wish and you could change anything, what would you change? Okay, so here are the results. Here's what I heard. What do you love about the congregation? Far and away, inclusivity. Inclusivity. So that was expressed most of the time using that word, but also using some other words like openness, acceptance, that kind of stuff. And I felt like it spilled into values, which we saw, which makes a lot of sense, right? But you love it, it's part of your values, and it's something that you've experienced as well. I heard a lot of people saying, I feel welcomed here. I feel like this is home. I wasn't from this congregation, but I feel like this is my place now. And so those are two different things. I just want you to acknowledge beautiful things, but two different things. One is to say, hey, we are inclusive, we welcome everybody in. The other is that you feel it and then live in it. So that was of note there. Far and away, that was the first, most often mentioned thing, but then you have these other things that were mentioned that you love about the congregation: progressive theology, rooted in Church of the Brethren values, a caring fellowship, community involvement and service, speaking out on important matters. You have a strong history of that, and worship. And I give some more background there. Of note, at the bottom, while on one hand, and I thought this was really healthy, on one hand you said, inclusivity, that's who we are, that's what we're about, but I'm not sure we always do a good job of that, right? And I think that's where most of you were saying, where's the rubber meet the road, right? When we come here, we all kind of look the same. We're all pretty close to, you look at your numbers age-wise, you're pretty close to this. You have a lot of people in certain demographics. You're white, right? And that's who, and then the notion of, and this spills into a little bit about how you could think about reaching out in some ways, both positively and negatively, but you also recognize that you're upper middle class and you're highly educated, right? It's who you are. Those are just facts, right? This is not beating up on you, but you note that, right? This is who we are. This is who's gravitated here. So it's that there's a tension. We say we're inclusive, but how inclusive are we really? Okay, when it comes down to it. Okay, so some of the values, again, inclusivity was right there. Then this notion of New Testament peace and justice beliefs that flow into acts of service, witness, and radical hospitality. I know I mashed a bunch of different values into that one sentence, but you feel like you're rooted in the Bible, and you know that you understand and see and read the Bible differently than everybody else does around here, pretty much, right? Probably the bulk of U.S. Christianity, and you know that. And for you, what that looks like is peace and justice efforts, service, witness, and again, inclusivity to some degree. Other values that were mentioned were the global perspective, alignment with Church of the Brethren Anabaptist values, community, and caring for everybody. If you were granted one wish, and I spilled the beans on this in the sermon, right? If you were granted one wish, what would it be? I was shocked. And shocked in a really good way, right? You have a hunger for numerical growth. I think that's rooted in the notion that you know that things can't continue the way they are and have the congregation be healthy. Just demographically, you know that things are going to, if you don't bring an influx of new people, just the way life works and the way death works, the congregation will be different in 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. So that was part of it. You also fear that you're going to lose your sense of critical mass, right? So you have even just the sanctuary, when somebody comes into worship on a Sunday, right? If you have a visitor come, you think, oh, what's this visitor going to see? They're going to see like a group of 150 people. So let me just tell you, like for me standing here, looking at you all now, I don't know how many people have left. The church looks way fuller than it did during worship. Right? Yeah, exactly. So there's just, I think you all have some understanding of some of those things and how they work, but just this notion of critical mass and how a critical mass works. And you're concerned that you're going to tip the wrong way in terms of critical mass, right? So, and there's some emotional stuff connected to this, right? You don't feel good about when you think back to what it was like in the old days that weren't all that old, right? They weren't all that long ago. One of the things that I will and did hit pretty hard in this report is your online community. So I don't even know how many people are online right now. Do we know? Just look it up if you can. I'd just be curious. But is this notion that we have this online community that is big, 177 screens. Got 10 online. So that's so fascinating, right? Really interesting information. So if you're averaging, the numbers say you're averaging 177 screens, views. And I say a little bit about this in the report. Some people think, well, is it really 177? You know, you might go home and watch this later. And so you know that raises the numbers. Yeah, Jim.
I checked 2 minutes after worship ended, it was 88.
Okay. So 88 views, and then I'm guessing one of you all needs to be an expert in how you post to YouTube, right? How YouTube numbers work, because when I was thick in this a few years ago, you would have the live number that you could see, and then it would take a couple hours, and that number would go down, and it would almost then repopulate, to an actual number of people who came on and then came off over the course of that hour, right? And then there are some people who then keep watching. So if you go and look at your numbers after the fact, if you look at a worship service that happened a month ago, you'll notice that hopefully those numbers are ticking up a little bit because some other people, myself included, right? I went, oh, let's see what they were doing a month ago, right? I went back and I looked and I saw. And so you'll see the numbers tick up. So there's all kinds of data that you need to look into here. Point being here, though, if you had 177 people, let's even just say you had, 88 people walk through those doors and come in here, you all would be running around like your hair was on fire. This is awesome. There's 88 people here who aren't usually here. But I think, and again, I'm not trying to point a finger here, but you've got 88 people online this morning, and I see you kind of going like, cool. right? So how do you work with that? How do you reckon with that? And again, this is new, right? This is pushing out into deep waters. So this is not easy. You're going to have to learn how to do some things. You're going to have to solve a bunch of problems, technological problems in terms of how this works for you as a community that is biblically and theologically rooted. What does it mean for us to be community now and is rooted in a theology of community? What does it mean for us to be community spread far and wide, right? What does it mean to have people, and some here in the front row, who are sometimes here in person and sometimes online? What does it mean to have people who are an ocean away and who are always here online? This gets my juices flowing. This is awesome, right? When you know that statistically the numbers are going the other way for Christianity across the country, right? Okay. Actually, I'm going to pause right here just for a second. I'm going to pause. Do you have any questions in terms of what we've talked about so far with the interviews, what I heard? Yeah, well, I guess we should get you the mic, right? Is this one? Does it matter which one we use, guys? Is that one the black one? That's the black one, yeah. Yep, you're on now. Thank you.
This isn't a question, but a comment. When I read this section, the first thing I wrote down was, how can we make all of this interactive? Mm-hmm. And then later, you addressed that, so thank you.
Yeah, well, and there's way more. I feel like that's just skimming the surface. Another question? I know you had one, go ahead.
It had to do with your comment, Lila, about how these statistics of our interviews reflect the number of people who participate. So I'm wondering about the numbers online comparing to the numbers who come in person.
Meaning demographically?
Demographically, yeah. Because we only had 1/4 of the total of online interviews.
Well, and to be clear, those interviews were mostly, the online Zoom interviews were people who primarily attend in person.
Was there an effort to get them, the other people?
Yeah, so the question for those of you who are watching online is, was there an effort to get people who are online to do interviews? And we didn't really engage that, did we?
Other than, because we don't have specific information,
yeah.
we don't know who's there. We did include as much information as we could in the newsletter if people get the newsletter, but we also know that many of those folks don't. So we were making announcements during the church service. We were trying to get that out as best we could without actually knowing who those folks are. So that's been the difficult part, and that's one of the things we want to start working on is getting to know who those people are and asking for contacts so that we can begin to bring them more and more information and build that community.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, and because it's we don't know who these folks are. Some of them are sitting here with us today. Some of them are some of our members who are regularly here, but maybe not feeling well, so they're at home. Others, we just don't know. So it's a little difficult right now, but there are ways through YouTube and through online, and we can open up the chat. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that we can work at getting to know and getting the information from that.
Yeah, it's going to take a serious,
Community, yeah.
a serious effort. Let's do
Yeah,
just two more because we'll keep it going. Yeah, are you going to run?
It seems to me that we're dealing with a conundrum here, which is that people who believe as we do are not really a majority. Well, maybe they are, but they're not a vocal majority in our community or in the country. Several Sundays ago, we had Joel Klein, and he preached a wonderful sermon. We thought it was wonderful. And in Sunday school afterwards, we said, I wonder how many people there are in our congregation that voted for Trump. Well, anyone who voted for Trump would not have liked that sermon. We believe a different way from a lot of people in our country. And if they visit our church, they're not going to be happy with what they hear, probably. And I would be reluctant to invite someone that I knew was supportive of our present administration to come to our church. There's another local, smaller church, I'll just say it, Eel River, talking with somebody who said they have some people who are very unhappy if politics is mentioned, and some people have left. But we are people who speak out.
Why is that a conundrum?
And not everybody is going to like that.
Why is that a conundrum?
Because we want to be inclusive. We want to include everybody, right? But
I hear it as an opportunity.
Well, there are a lot of people who do believe as
Sorry,
we do.
I'm rushing you along just because we had so much. One last one before we move on.
I just have one quick question about the online numbers. And Jim, you may be able to say this, but Timbercrest would be 1, online 2. Okay. And I have friends at Timbercrest who have never been acquainted with the Church of the Brethren, who have attended there and are so attracted to what they've experienced.
It's a tremendous tool. All right, let's put a pin in that just because we got to get on to other stuff, and we can pick it up later in our conversation after lunch. Thank you for all. Sorry I rushed you along. All right, so here's some other things that were mentioned about if you could change worship style. Innovation was something that was mentioned. Provide more for children and families. A solution for the pastoral staff conundrum, that is obviously on your minds, and understandably so, right? And then bureaucratic and rigid congregational structure. So this was, I'll say a little bit about that last one. This was expressed by a number of people just feeling like the congregation, when you think about it, the congregation or the congregational structure was built for a time when the congregation itself was much bigger, right, numerically. And so because of that, and because the way in which people attend church and the amount of time people have for church as a volunteer institution is also changing, it is probably time to reconsider some ways that you can streamline. And there's a number of Church of the Brethren denominational resources that are out there on how to do that, what to do, et cetera. Did you have someone say that? No. Okay. All right. I'll count on the fact that you could read that or will read that or did read that. Membership, attendance, and finances. So these, again, this just paints part of the picture. I don't want to, it's important to look at these numbers. I don't want to treat these numbers as if they're the end-all, be-all. Numbers are never entirely perfect either, but they do give us really important insights into where organization is at. So this is great. I love looking at these. This is a simplified version of average attendance numbers by year. Okay, so if you can't see I got a pointer on here. So membership is green if you can't see that. So you got membership up here, up top line, and then you've got average in-person worship attendance is there, that orangish line, I guess that is. And then you've got the blue is, that's a pretty fun jump, right? You got that blue is, and we heard a little bit about that in the worship leading, thank you for that, is online views. And so, yes, views, we can put that in a different category and think about that in different ways, but let's just think about this in terms of the trend lines, right? So the trend lines are generally speaking going down. However, as I noted in the narrative that follows in your report. Whoops, pushed the wrong button. I think this is fascinating, that most congregational trend lines go like this. You know, they're coming down. And so the fact that in the early teens, 20 teens, you all had a rise in attendance, you're beating the odds. You were beating the odds, because pretty much most congregations, and this cuts across, you know, I'm talking mainline denominations, liberal, conservative, whatever, right? Mainline Protestantism has been on a steady decline. And so the fact that you bucked that for a while, I think is, in my mind, is a really positive sign. Shows me that you've done it before, and why not do it again, right? That's the way I view it. So you had that, and then of course we got COVID. So when COVID hits, online viewership goes way up, and as COVID hits, in-person goes way down. And then again, another ray of light, in my opinion, is you've got, okay, we were down in worship, then as we're coming out of COVID, numbers start to rise again. You all know more of the backstory in terms of why that might have happened. Maybe some people were just feeling more comfortable being out, and some people took longer than others. I don't know what the community trend line was like on that, but when I see this as an outsider looking in, again, I see, okay, we have growth. We see people who maybe were engaged in the congregation and who kept coming back. Let's put it that way, right? However, we have a pretty significant decline from 2023 to 2024. And I'm guessing this is, you know this, right? This is why the number one concern when I interviewed you was numerical growth, okay? Let's look at the online numbers too. Again, there's some, I think, you know, a second ago I was saying, you got 177 people, that's amazing. It is amazing. Shadow side of that is that number's going down as well, right? So in my mind, if you don't engage those folks, that number will continue to decline. Okay? Again, there's a number of factors here. When you have a consistent preaching pastor, if that's the model you go with, those numbers will probably come up to some degree, because people will feel that sense of consistency. Maybe, I don't know. Be my guess, but I don't know. I also hear you've been having some awesome preaching too. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about other people. Like you all have. I was talking with Jim this morning. You all have had a home run after home run in terms of preachers who come in here. So that's been amazing. Okay, so I just basically gave you the analysis. I don't really need to talk a lot about numbers. We can dwell on it if you want to, but I thought it's important when you look at these numbers to just see what the trend line is like. Again, you don't have a lot of deficits. Most of your deficits are slight. I'm guessing you play things pretty close to the card financially as decision makers. You have been generous, and you continue your generosity in the congregation. The annual budget has continued to grow, so you can fund the ministries that you want to do that you feel like are important. At the same time, your budget has grown. Your financial cushion has also grown, right? So that's all really important. It positions you really well to do fun and engaging and important ministry, right? Because you can only imagine the number of congregations that are out there that are seeing similar attendance numbers, but they say, I sure wish we had some financial resources that we could invest towards turning those numbers around, towards doing something different, towards a ministry like that. You all have provided those resources, okay? So again, that's interesting and important to note. So we get on to, well, let me pause again just to see if there's a question or two. How are we doing? We're doing pretty good on time. Okay, but a question or two on any of that last part, kind of looking at attendance, looking at finances, looking at where you're at on that. Anything? Okay. Good. Let's move on to the recommendations. Again, I won't, whoa, the formatting got really messed up there. So before we went into this, I feel like it's important. This is I like to call it the lay of the land report. So I like to give a little bit of what I have seen in the community up to this point. Before we launch into recommendations, what are some of the assets that the congregation has? What I saw and what I see here is a committed core. I see people like this kind of showing. So again, like I was talking about the number of people who are here for worship, the number of people who are here for worship and the ratio of the number of people who are here right now, phenomenal. Like phenomenal. To me, that says you are actively engaged in growing the congregation and making the congregation, bringing the congregation to a healthier place, right? You could have easily said, well, I'm going to go out. Maybe the roads have been salted by now and I can get home and get ready for the Super Bowl, right? Get ready to sing my Fly, Eagles, Fly song. That's, yeah. I'm from Pennsylvania. I did sorry get that. Okay, so what I see, this committed core. And not only a committed core, but you have good leaders, right? You've had really good pastoral leadership in the past. You have really good pastoral leadership now. You also have, round of applause. You also have amazing lay leaders, right? Yeah, clap for that too. Like you have an unbelievably deep bench here in this congregation. So you've got all that going for you. You have self-knowledge. You know who you are. So when I go and I ask congregations, what do you love about this congregation and what are its values? A lot of the congregations I walk into, believe it or not, are kind of basically like, I don't know, or the bland, well, it's my church family, which is great. I mean, to me, that I don't mean to besmirch that. Like, it's important to them. It's been an important place for their growth, for their faith development, maybe, but for them as a community. The way that you all were able to rattle off inclusivity, brethren value. I mean, you just went down the line, and that's what I kept hearing time and time and time again. Right? So you know who you are. This was the pièce de résistance for me, right? When I went and I visited with the youth, they said pretty much the exact same thing. When I said, what do you love about the congregation and what are its values? Holy cow. Right? So, first of all, you have really engaged and intelligent youth. But second of all, they knew all that. And they're on board with it. That's what they love about the congregation. Well done. All right. Another asset is this online community, full of potential, and a strong history of innovation and resilience, right? I know you as a congregation through the years from afar. I've visited a couple times, but I know how hard you will nonviolently fight for what you believe in, right? Because you've done it. And I don't see any reason why that would be different now than it has been in your history. Okay. Anything you would add to this in terms of assets and affirmations about this congregation? Think on it. All right. Okay, so recommendation number 1, strengthen and reimagine pastoral leadership. It's time to rethink who a pastor is and what a pastor does, okay? So, again, I think a lot of you were savvy to some of these dynamics because you've been searching for a pastor for some time. There are not a lot of pastors out there. There are not Tim McElwee broke it down really succinctly for me this morning. There's not a lot of pastors, period. There's not a lot of progressive pastors. There's not a lot of pastors, what were the other ones, who want to come to a cornfield. Maybe, I think there's one more, Tim, but I don't remember. The point is taken, right? I talked about bench, your bench being deep. The pool, I'll use a different analogy. The pool is shallow when it comes to pastoral leadership, especially in the Church of the Brethren. It's like that in many other denominations, but especially in the Church of the Brethren, right? So there are, however, congregations who have found leadership and are exploring what leadership looks like in different ways. And so when I hone in on who the pastor is and what the pastor does, that's what I'm starting to talk about, okay? So who the pastor is, I think it's interesting. And I would encourage you to do this. I think I did this last time, maybe. If I didn't, I should have. I would encourage you all to go to whatever congregation in town. Hold your nose about the theology, I get it. But go to whatever congregation in town that is getting buzz, that people are going to. And just kind of look at the mechanics of how it works, right? In this case, I'd be interested for you to look at who the pastor is and what the pastor does. Because that'll be really interesting, right? A lot of times who the pastor is, just one of the things I note here, and you would note many others if you did a visit to a congregation like that, is there is this real value. Well, you see it in our presidential politics. We mentioned that a second ago. There is more value placed on authenticity than there is on polish, right? So that doesn't mean you have to believe like they do, but what it might mean is, like, again, what I talked about in the sermon with my kids, who, I mean, their antenna, I think they trust me, pretty sure they do, but their antenna are like, when they hear about somebody who's a church person, they're like, what is this person going to say? What do they think? Am I safe? Like, those are all their first thoughts, right? So you can have an authenticity that still reaches them, right? The polish, when they see the polish, they're going to turn off right away. Like, this is boring, right? Remember, these are the generations of the 5-second attention span. And we can say, isn't that terrible? They should do better. Or we can say, how are we going to reach them? Right? I mean, if you want to grow, you're going to have to think about it. Okay. So what a pastor does, I would make a really strong pitch to you and I'm calling this a rebuilding phase. Like, you were at one level and now you're trying to get back to another level, or I would say not even back, achieve a different level, right? So I would argue that you want to rethink what your pastor does primarily. And again, this is not a knock in any way on your previous pastors. It's a more reflection of how times are changing. Okay? So I think a lot of what has been valued is somebody who will stand behind the pulpit, bring a strong pulpit presence, right? And administrate the heck out of this bureaucracy that you have. Right? So everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and we're all organized, we're all aligned. I love organization, I get it. But in a rebuilding phase, I think you probably want to start thinking about how you can value inspiration over decorum, I say, right? And again, so my first Sunday when I came here, and I preached from down here, at least for a little bit, I was curious how you all would respond to that, right? That's one of the reasons I did it. Yeah, and that's what I saw. I saw, okay, you all aren't that concerned about it, right? Which I think was good. There's a level of flexibility there. But I think when you think about what the pastor is doing, I think you need and want more of an innovator, right? Rather than an administrator. Okay? Because when we're talking about online stuff and and how to dig into the numbers on that and how to engage people in different ways and how to do all that, you want an innovator, right, over an administrator. And I think, and Lila and I went back and forth on some of these numbers in a good way. But I was looking at the job descriptions that your pastors have, and the number of meetings that are on the job description. And I know that they're not required to go to every single meeting, but it's a lot harder. Again, you imagine a new pastor coming in, I'll speak from experience, new pastor coming in, you're likely going to want to try to hit all those, right? At least a little bit, right? And so it's interesting, and then after you hit all those, you're likely going to start getting sucked into those more and more. And people like the pastor to be there, right? People like the pastor to be there because the pastor can both bring, hopefully, a really strong presence. The pastor can even do some pastoral care there, know what's going on in the life of the congregation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. and do the closing prayer, right? Thank goodness the pastor is here because we don't have to do the closing prayer. Exactly. So you really need to move towards a place where your pastors, and I'm not just talking about whoever your new pastor or professional might be, right, are spending less time on some of those things. And I don't mean ignoring them, I'm spending less time. So in my long-term pastorate, we did the same thing. We looked at the number of hours that we were spending in meetings, and we said, is that really where we want our ministry hours to go? We asked that to the congregation, and the congregation said, what? You're spending that much time in meetings? No, let's figure out how to change that. And so some people didn't love it because, yeah, somebody else is going to have to do the closing prayer now. But what that meant was, okay, if I'm the chair of a particular commission, might mean I call the pastor who's liaising with that group and I say, hey, here's what's coming up. What's your input on this? And they take that. It's a 10-minute conversation now rather than a 2-hour meeting. Okay, so there's all kinds of ways to work at that. But you want your pastor driving and spending their time in the innovative zone, in the creative zone, rather than in these administrative areas. It will still take administration, but the emphasis will be on innovation. One of the things that is really important, and I heard this, we had some discussion about this in the executive board, is to think about how many pastors. My recommendation for you is that you need at least 3 full-time equivalent pastors or professionals. So what I mean by that, and we explored that a little bit in executive board, was it may not need to be an ordained clergy member, right? But there might be people who bring gifts that will work towards the goals that you set forward, right? So for example, if you had a really strong technical person who also understood at least a little bit about the ethics of community in this place, that could be an amazing person that I would love for you to spend at least one half-time equivalent, right, of a full-time person on building your online community, right? So does that need to be a pastor? I don't think so, maybe, right? If at least the first phase is really digging into a lot of the technological stuff that you need to do and the organizational work that you need to do in terms of making connections with people, right? Again, still rooted in that understanding of who you are as a people of God, an Anabaptist community that values community, right? But I don't know that you need to go to seminary for 3 years to do that, right? Okay, let me pause right there. I'm guessing there might be questions about this or comments, feedback. You want me to run it? Okay, thank you.
The Church of the Brethren has a historical tradition of calling people out of the congregation for leadership, and we have done that with some people, but I don't know if we've really looked at doing that this time.
Yeah.
And particularly in light of what do we really need and what are the gifts. So if we haven't done that, I'd suggest maybe we do that.
Do you have a formal call process in this congregation? Do you have a committee or anything that calls people in the ministry? How many ministers has this congregation called in the last 20 years? How many ministers has this congregation called? Whether to ministry anywhere, has said, hey, we think you have the gifts for ministry. 3? Okay. A handful, yeah, in the last 20 years. All right. Good. 4. I see a 4.
But the Church of the Brethren also has a historical of lay ministers, and it's very strong. I don't know the exact date when they started paying ministers, but I know my husband's father was in Anvil, and he was the first paid minister, and that was in the early 70s, I think.
That's where I got married. Get your steps in.
Yeah, thanks. I don't disagree with anything that you've reported, but I do have just some things that I'm thinking about with the online aspect of what you're recommending. And virtual stuff has invaded everything that we do, and so it's never going away.
Yeah.
But there is a undeniable qualitative difference between the interactions that we have online and what we do in person. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you approach that?
Yeah. So couple of things. One is, again, I'll refer back to my time at Elizabethtown. When we started, it was somewhat similar history to you all. We started to do some things online before COVID hit, thankfully. And there was a lot of pushback in the beginning because the conventional wisdom was if we offer it online, people would much rather sit around and drink their coffee in their PJs than come to worship. What we found was that engagement in in-person worship actually increased because people, when they weren't able to be here in person, whether they were on vacation, sick, whatever, they were still able to participate in the life of the community, in at least that way, and feel more connected. So that was one thing that was interesting. It'd be interesting to see if that still holds up. You know what I mean? That's like 5 years ago now. But I would guess it would. The other thing is, how do we think about that in terms of beyond the drivable kind of area that we have? So in your case, it's been mentioned a couple of times, and I mentioned it in the report. So one of the things that's working against you is you live in a very small population area, right? So your options are only so limited. And I get the sense that that number is going down. Is that true? Like more and more people are moving out than are moving in. And so this enables you to cast the net. I'll use my sermon metaphor, right? To cast the net even more broadly for people who don't have access to this kind of unique and special theology in wherever they live. And so, yeah, it's not going to be I think they would say, it's not as good as if I had this in my backyard, but it's still better than going to the Christian nationalist options that I have in town, or driving an hour, or driving an hour and a half, or whatever. Am I scratching the itch a little bit?
And some of those people that we're catching in the net are some of the youth of the church, or the people that are from a distance, or the people that haven't been able to stay connected because of proximity, or because they can't find a home church or a place that replaces this. And so some of those numbers are reaching out people that might circle back here at some point in time in their life.
Yeah, you help stay connected. Yep.
During COVID, one of the things that I think helped us stay connected was the after worship breakout into the small groups. But now that we're back together, that has stopped. And for those people that watch online, why can't we set up something where those people can choose to break out into a small group and have discussions about the sermon, or things like that?
There's some low-hanging fruit there. Yep.
That I think that would help bring people in.
Yep. All right, we should move. We have okay, one more, and then we'll go on.
I think this relates a little bit more to the numbers we were looking at for attendance, but I wanted to share that for my family and our children, Sunday morning worship is the worst part of church, but they really deeply enjoy engaging in the church in other ways. And so I guess I kind of want to just challenge the assumption a little bit that Sunday morning attendance is the only way to measure the vitality of the church and people's engagement. And as we think forward to what kinds of activities that might take place in the church, it might be that other things that are happening on Wednesday nights or Friday nights or whatever are also really meaningful points of connection that aren't captured if we're only looking at what happens Sunday morning.
Love that. Do you all track those numbers? If not, it's a great reminder that you could and should. Those other points of engagement. Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's push on for the sake of time. Reclaim evangelism. Gross, right? Become masters at telling your MCB story in new ways that connect with many. I won't kind of bore you with a little bit of the theological and biblical stuff here, other than to say you are a passionate group of people who are following Jesus. And in my interviews with you, you do believe that it has improved your life. You do believe that this community can serve other people in the similar or same kinds of ways. And so my encouragement would be, don't let the fact that we've seen evangelism done so horrifically dissuade us from doing it a better way. This is just a checklist kind of thing. We actually discovered some stuff in the executive board meeting, which I thought was kind of good. I think there was a notion that we thought we were doing this maybe better than you actually were, and so there's some room to do this. And I would encourage you to put really skilled people in charge of doing this. And it's an opportunity not just to say, hey, we miss you, hey, welcome back. It's also an opportunity to say, to have conversations about, oh, you're not coming? What don't you miss? Right? Because they've essentially made the choice, like, we're finding other things to do, right, that appear more valuable to us. They could give you some really important information. Okay. Recommendation number 3, continue building and growing the online community. We've talked about this a little bit already, and some of the specifics. Well, I'll go back to the underlying part. Rather than be seen as a compromise, the online community may be seen as an opportunity to share the unique Jesus message of this place and provide safe harbor for many, no matter their location. Yeah, it's not the same. I agree. It's not the same as being in person. But for people who are participating, it is better than whatever they have access to. That's why they're participating. And then just, again, some, maybe for the sake of time, you can read some of this, but just some ways to think about improving your online appearance, because that's really important. And learning more, we talked about that a little bit already. How can you learn more about who your online community is? And then the next question is, how do you serve them, right? It's the same kinds of questions we would ask if someone was attending in person. I want you to begin thinking about the online community as your congregation. It's not just people who are voyeuristically looking in, right? These are people who want to be engaged in some way. And they're going to have different levels of desire for engagement, just like, I'm sure, there are some people who, I don't know who they are, so I'm not afraid to say this. There are some people who come in 5 minutes after they know the service starts, they sit in the back pew, and then they leave during the last hymn. And I hope you say, thank God they were here, right? There's going to be varying levels of desire for how people want to participate in the online community. So there will be some who say, hey, I just want to get that word of encouragement for the week. And there's going to be others who say, oh my gosh, I wish I had somebody. I feel alone. I need somebody to talk to. I need pastoral care. I need a community of people to talk with in a Zoom session afterwards, whatever the case may be. And to get to the last one, stewardship. And we often think about stewardship as money, but I want you to start thinking about stewardship as time as well, and appearance along with that. So how do we create an inspiring tagline? Again, you all know who you are, which is probably part of your challenge. Like, you articulate things very well here. It's part of being an academic community. This might be a big challenge for you to figure out how to hone it down to 5 or 8 words. The idea is really to make it so that when you're talking to people, practicing evangelism, I have a hard time saying it even, right? When you're talking about people, you have something that you can just pluck off the shelf and say, oh, this is what my community of faith is about. It's about da, 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 right? You have a beautiful statement on your website. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but how do you make it so that you all can remember it when somebody puts you on the spot, right? Stewardship of identity and name change. There's a slide, maybe we'll get to that. I encourage you to invest in marketing and I encourage you to explore and implement ways to streamline bureaucracy. We've talked a little bit about that already too. So tagline, I talked a little bit about that. The name change, quite frankly, I recommend this to most Church of the Brethren congregations that I consult with, because whether you're in a very Brethren area or you're in an area that has no Churches of the Brethren, at the end of the day, the name Brethren, for you all, maybe most importantly, is not inclusive, right? Inclusivity is your number one love and value of the congregation, yet on your sign and on all your official paperwork and on your website, it has this exclusive name. That just doesn't match, right? It's archaic, right? Brethren. I work around the country. People think it's a cult. I mean, that's not hyperbole. People think it's a cult. And John Grisham wrote a book about a cult, and it was called The Brethren or something like that. So it's an archaic word, right? And again, to be crystal clear, I'm not talking about detaching from any of the values, certainly, that you appreciate about the Church of the Brethren and the history of the Church of the Brethren. I'm not talking about detaching from the denomination, right, in any kind of formal way. I'm just talking about getting a new name that reflects who you are and communicates to people who you are, okay? Yeah, nothing more to say about that. We can maybe hit it in questions if we have it. Invest in marketing. I know it sounds icky to a lot of people, but it's a necessity. Streamline bureaucracy, we've talked about that. Okay, how much time do we have? 3 minutes. Sorry. And again, there's another opportunity. We're gonna have lunch, and then we have an opportunity after that if you have time. And of course, even if you got plans today, I understand. If you just wanted to send me an email or have a phone conversation, I'd be glad to do that, just to help continue the conversation. What questions do you have, or observations, pushback, whatever do you have right now? One over here, behind you back there.
These are just two short observations. I grew up in a small church. I was a PK, and I have not attended that church for 15 years, though by letter I'm still a member there. And in the 15 years, I can count on 0 fingers the number of times they've reached out to get me to go back. Not that I would, and that's not the point, but something to think about when he talks about, that church, to be fair, and forgive the metaphor, but is on a hospice. So it's something to think about when you're talking about all the members or people that used to attend. The second thing is, you suggested stepping foot into the church or the churches that are growing. My daughter attends every Wednesday night one of those churches, and they're KFC, I think it's called. I don't know the acronym, forgive me, but that same church, I was just looking on Facebook, has twice the followers, in part because our Facebook page is a private group that is by invite only, and that pastor, ordained or not, but the person who speaks the most of that church has a podcast. He's on social media platforms, and again, I know this is foreign to a lot of people, and that's not church as we grew up, me being one of those, but just food for thought.
Thank you. Others?
Greg, I appreciate your willingness to name things that we may not want to hear, but we need to hear, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. I said it in my first visit, I want you to succeed, because I think it's important that you succeed as a congregation for the sake of the world.
I wonder if, as any part of this process, there was an effort, or if there could be in the future an effort to reach out to people who have recently left our congregation or are thinking about leaving our congregation or are currently on the periphery because of maybe feeling unincluded, and what we might learn from those experiences, and if there's a way that then we might learn things that are actionable that give us ways to grow in the ways that we want to grow by talking not just amongst ourselves, but with the people that we've lost or wish were here.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. It did remind me of one thing that was said in the executive board, which was somebody noticed that there's nothing about, in the recommendations, there's no, hey, have a kids ministry kind of thing here. Yeah, young families. That's not because I don't think it's important, but I'm curious how you would do that. Like literally, like, what are you going to do about that? I also didn't make prescriptive observations about other things you could or should do, but I want you to consider embracing that. That was also a reminder to say that these are recommendations. And it might be, that's all well and good, Greg, but we're not going to do that one, that one, and that one. And we are going to do this one and this one and this one. So I hope it's food for thought. And it led to a great conversation in our meeting.
So thanks. You just said what I was going to say. The executive board is very excited about the results, the report, but we also recognize it's not exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list. And as Greg said, as we are going through the process of discernment and looking at these recommendations, they're recommendations. He's not saying we have to do these. I'm going to step out here and maybe speak for Greg to say that if we, through our discernment and our discussions and our wrestling with the ideas, we come up with 3 other recommendations and say, we think these are the 3 important ones and not these 2, I think Greg would be okay with that.
I would be thrilled.
Yes. So yeah. It's, the other thing that I want to make sure we understand is Greg's not saying we have to do these, or these are the only 4 you have to do, or this is how you do it. That's our job. That's our work next. How do we move forward? How do we take this information and make it actionable? And that's the next big step. And I appreciate all of your comments and your questions. There's lots more work to do, and there'll be a lot more opportunities for you to be involved in our moving forward. The board in our next meeting will be discussing what are our next steps to get us keep going. We're not going to put this on a shelf, and when Greg asks us in 3 or 4 months or 6 months, so how are you doing on these? And we go, oh yeah, let's see, that report is back there on some shelf. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to be moving forward. So appreciate all of your help and your discussion. It is time now. There'll be more opportunities in the Q&A. So if you can stick around, you have other questions, we can delve into some of these questions further. But it is time for the Fellowship Commission to have an announcement.
It's sometimes hard for you to hear me when I speak in the Family Life Center, so I thought I'd tell you here. I want to thank you all for, especially those that brought soup. So this is our Super Bowl. We thought that would be an easy way for the Fellowship Committee to be able to participate in this meeting and also have some food. We sent out some information about the dishwasher, but we do have paper plates. So anybody can stay, even if you didn't bring table service. And Mel has told me that we can use the dishwasher, we can't sanitize with it. So anyway, if you brought your plates, we really appreciate that. Down when you go in, the center table, we have 7 soups. So you have 1 bowl. So I'm going to tell you what they are. There will be signs there, but I'm giving you a heads up. So we'll go down both sides of that center table with ladles. You can get soup out of both sides to try to make it fast. We have a vegetable beef, a vegetarian vegetable that's gluten-free, a taco soup, a garlic soup, corn chowder that is gluten-free, a Mexican corn soup, and a vegan lentil soup. Okay, lots of soups. I think you'll have plenty. And then down the tables in the middle will be the rest of the food. And we thank you. We hope you all will stay.
Should we wait till we get in there to sing? You want to sing?
Let's sing. Can you lead us?
No, I can't. I asked if we should sing here or wait until we get in there, and she said, you lead us. I said, I can't today, not today.
Praise God from whom? Praise God from whom all blessings